Morning, eighth graders. It is October 1st. It is Thursday, and it is section 4, chapter 3, which means we're done with the chapter, which means we got a test coming up. That'll be on Wednesday. It also means that you need to turn in your notebooks once you have this section written down. Okay, you should have chapter 1, 4 sections. Chapter 2 actually had 5 sections, and chapter 3 had 4 sections. You need to bring your physical notebook into me on one of the designated drop-off times, either today. The aides are there until 5 in the old gym lobby. Tomorrow they're there. I'm not sure exactly the times on Friday, but they're there almost throughout the entire day. Or Tuesday from 2:45 to 5. So you need to make sure that your notes are all in order, they're labeled, and your name has got to be on the front of your notebook, or else I won't be able to tell whose is which, and makes it much harder to grade. So you got to bring those in and drop them off when you do your normal drop-offs. Please don't do it next Thursday or Friday because I won't have time to get them graded. Otherwise, 2 weeks ago, today was the test. Several of you have not taken it. Several of you have not been doing your stuff, haven't been answering the videos, you've been being counted absent. Those of you that are doing that probably can't hear me saying this right now. So maybe I'm wasting my time. But next Friday is the end of the grading period. And anything, I've been very lenient with taking stuff that's very late. And again, a test, 100-point test was 2 weeks ago today, 14 Earth days. Several of you have not done it. And so as of next Friday, I cannot accept anything that's late. Again, the idea that you're supposed to just pop in and scribble a few things down and be done, not how this is supposed to work. You're supposed to be simulating a school day. You're supposed to be doing, at least several hours, just like the people that are in school. And so the idea that you can't be expected to do this is not, whenever I make these videos, sometimes they're 15, sometimes they're 20 minutes. If you're in class, it's 45, and you've got to hear my lame dad jokes and dumb arm flailing around and talking for 45 minutes, and you get about half of that. And so the idea that this is not a possible task is not really real. I know that it's not easy either. I'm doing this with my kids in Heron, and it is a pain in the butt, and I understand that you and your parents and guardians are stressed by this. But I can't give you credit for things you haven't done or haven't turned in. A lot of you are just turning in blank things too. You're just hitting the turn in button to show your parents, look, I've turned this in. But there's nothing there. You haven't done any of it. And so that's a 0 also. And zeros don't average well, of course. So make sure that you bring your notebooks in, make sure you're ready for the test, and make sure that you take the second test if you haven't done that, which again, there's a lot of you. Most of you that are listening to this, though, probably are the ones that have done it. So contest from last time, Samuel, I think, was closest. He guessed 26. The number was 37. I would have proof, but I don't know where I said that paper. So anyway, here we go. So Northerners began to hey, the South, let's figure out your own stuff. We're tired of having to send our literal army down there to watch you to make sure you're voting the way that we think you should be voting. But again, this is not, it's understandable. This attitude, for just what I was saying on the last slide. I've been 2 weeks trying to get people to take the test. So I'm like, hey, you got to figure it out yourself. And so that's kind of the Northern attitude, is they're like, hey, we've been doing this for not really that long when you consider world history. They've been doing this for a decade and a half to 2 decades. Thaddeus Stephen, it says here, dies in 1868. That's literally 3 years after the end of the Civil War. So it's not we've really been grinding on this for, 2-3 centuries, of course, And again, this is always a common misconception we have. People feel like the Civil War and slavery and all that stuff, that's so long ago, it doesn't matter. And that's not true at all. That's 2 80-year-old women or men living and dying back to back. If you know someone that's over 80, when they were born, there were people alive that were alive, several people that were alive during the Civil War. That's when that's taking out people who are lived to be 90 or 100 or even older. That's just 80-year-olds. That's 160 years ago. That's 1860. So this idea that it was so long ago that it doesn't have an impact on things is not true. But anyway, the North is getting tired of like, hey, and again, I think we bailed on this too soon, but the feeling and the sentiment is at least understandable. Like, hey, we've been, you started this war. We had to go and destroy several billions of dollars worth of property in your so-called country, which wasn't really a country. And now you're like, we've got to clean it up and we've got to sit down there and make sure you're doing things right. And that's not right. Another thing is that, like I've said over and over, the idea that like South is, well, on the here, South is racist and North is not true. You could argue that one is more racist than the other. The one that was keeping slaves, I would say that's a decent argument. But at the same time, the idea that Northerners are like, hey, we want to all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and everybody's created equal is not really that true. In fact, the people that were wanting just equal rights, like voting rights and the rights to earn a living and, the ability to give these people education and resources, these people being the freed slaves, those are labeled radical Republicans, like their ideas were so radical, which again, saying them in 2020, this is, seems like to me and probably to you, the bare minimum we should be doing. So the Republican Party hears rumors of corruption, and you could see this happening all the time if you pay any attention to the news. Perception is really reality, and whether or not Grant was or wasn't corrupt became less of the point of whether or not people believed he was corrupt. And once people believe, you're in junior high, you know how this works better than any adult or president probably could. The idea that things are said that are not true. If people believe it's true, it doesn't really matter if it's true or not in their mind. And so is that fair? No. Is it right? No, of course, but it's the way reality is. I remember in junior high, there's all kinds of gossip and rumors and all that kind of stuff. A lot of it wasn't true, but people talk and they're going to talk and talk. And obviously I do my best to try to stop it, but it's not always possible. So the Republicans split again. They were split when Lincoln was president, and Lincoln gets shot, and now the liberal Republicans are back towards more of what Lincoln wanted, but in a worse way. They more of like, hey, let's just bail and let these guys figure it out, and that's not really going to lift up those people that had been chained and enslaved for 1619 to 1865, bare minimum of 2.5 centuries. And so they wanted a more peaceful, what's called reconciliation. I believe that's one of your vocab words. It means coming together again peacefully. Excuse me. Despite that, President Grant was still reelected. 1872. And again, if you pay attention to dates, and I'm not saying you need to, again, if there are dates that I want you to remember, I'll make a note of them on your study guide or whatever. And so I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we try to memorize dates when we study history instead of general ideas. But if you've even been paying attention to dates at all, the Civil War ended in 1865. We just talked about Thaddeus Stevens dying on a slide or two ago in 1868. That's 3 years. This is now, of course, I know this is not math-free room, I'm sorry, but that's 7 years. That's a snap of a finger, a blink of an eye in the course of human history. And the idea that like, oh man, we've been at this for 7 years and we're just going to quit. That doesn't, not just ending slavery, Reconstruction, Freedmen's Bureau, and all this stuff. That's just anything in history. The idea that things can change in a short amount of time, but you really don't see the fruits of those labors for usually decades, if not generations. And the idea that we're going to change, everything's fixed in 3 years or in 7 years after the Civil War is not realistic at all. But it's easy to say sitting here in 2020, if you're living in that time period, 7 years feels like a long time. For most of you that are listening, that's more than literally half of your life. And so the idea is true that 7 years is like no time. But when you're living through those 7 years, it feels, a lot longer. Okay. So the Amnesty Act pardons all former Confederates, and now they can. And again, this was a radical idea that if you committed treason and fought a war against the United States, you can't be mayor or governor or representative or senator or serve on the county board. That's not that radical. That's pretty common sense. You know, if somebody commits treason and fights a war against the United States, they can't be in the United States Congress. That's, you know, pretty. That's a pretty low level, radical, again, finger quoting idea. So in the South, especially, the Democratic Party starts to regain its power, and so in states where the Democratic Party is not able to, through traditional voting means, regain its power, the KKK really steps up their efforts. Sadly, and again, like I said, the picture on the last slideshow was pretty graphic, but it gives you an example of the idea that this wasn't just a small group of bad apples, a small group of people doing this on their own. This was a lot of people killing a lot of people, thousands, and it was tens of thousands of people that were either literally cheering them on or turning their back to them, which is the same as helping the people that are doing the violence. If you don't step up to help anything about it, if you just ignore it and be like, well, I don't want to get involved, you know, what you're doing is letting victims be victims. And so they would literally bring weapons to voting stations and terrorize people. I mean, I take a lot of pride in my duty and right and ability to vote. And of course, I vote every time it's possible to vote. But if there were somebody with a gun, like, I'm going to shoot you if you're going to vote, I would very strongly reconsider that pride and that duty and that obligation I feel to vote. Like I said over and over last year, the same lame joke over and over. One of my main goals in life is like, hey, don't get shot. And so, again, you can be like, I'm going to vote no matter what, but no matter what usually has limits, and that, you know, somebody pointing a gun right in your face is really going to push those limits pretty quickly. There's a recession, the economy goes down, and that's always bad for the people in power, even though in most cases they really have very little influence over, especially the president. Congress can have some influence, but the president usually has not that much influence over whether the economy is going up or down. And again, even if presidents do, it's usually down the road. Like I said, the idea that things just happen at a blink of an eye and a president pushes some legislation through, or Congress makes some law involving taxes or whatever, and all of a sudden, bing, the economy is better, is not really realistic. And, you know, obviously, if you pay attention to the news, we really haven't learned this lesson by 2020. People are still doing this, where, you know, the president or Congress, whether it's Obama or Trump or anybody else, will do something, the stock market will temporarily spike, and everybody's like, yeah, the economy's fixed. And then, you know, the employment numbers come in, and they're really not. You know, it's just like, think about planting a tree. You plant an acorn, you're not going to have acorns growing with it by the end of the day. It takes years for trees to bear fruit. I don't know why I picked acorns. They're not really good to eat, but oranges or apples or whatever, you know, you get the idea. So many blame the Republicans for this depression. Like I said, you know, that's part of the job. You know, when you're the president, people are going to blame you when things go bad, more than they're going to give you credit when things go well. So for the first time since the beginning of the Civil War, Democrats held seats in the Senate. They actually held a majority in the House of Representatives. And so, again, this gives a signal to Congress that, like, people are ready to move on from Reconstruction, which that's not fair. That's not fair to these formerly enslaved people that are now really literally left to hang in a lot of instances, as sad as that is to say. And so the idea that, you know, we've gone not even 2 decades now, we're like, well, we tried, we quit, doesn't really, wash out. We should have done more for sure. So in 1876, Hayes runs against Tilden. Tilden is literally one electoral vote from winning the Electoral College, I should say, winning the election. And there are basically parts of, or all of, 4 different states that are in dispute. And those electoral votes add up to 20. If you remember from our Constitution test last year, each state gets a certain number of electoral votes. And if you think about them as points on the scoreboard, it can help you. So if you win Illinois, you get those 20 votes or those 20 points. And now they have to add up to 270 out of 538. Back then, it was a different number. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, because there are fewer states, of course, and different population, different numbers. So there were 20 votes that were up in the air, and Hayes needed all 20. Tilden needed 1. And so they elect a commission of 5 people from the Supreme Court, 5 people from the Senate, and 5 people from the House of Representatives. 7 of them were Republicans, 7 of them were Democrats, and 1 was an independent. Independent quits for reasons you could probably understand. If you are in a room with 14 other people and it's 7 on 7 and they're just screaming at each other, and you're the one that's trying to be the moderator, the arbitrator, the mediator, the person in the middle, it's got to be tiring. And so he quits. They replace him with a Republican. It's now 8-7 towards the Republicans on this commission. And they vote, as you could probably guess, 8-7 to give Hayes literally all 20 of the votes, not 10 and 10, not anything else. They give him all 20. And so the Democrats are like, hey, maybe no. And again, we're doing this again. People are talking about like, oh, the court's got to be fixed to decide the election. We got an opening in the Supreme Court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. That's not how elections work. You vote and you count them up. The courts are not supposed to step in. So anyway, the Democrats are like, this is not how this works. And so they cut a deal basically like, hey, we'll take the troops out of the South and we'll leave you alone if you let Hayes be president, which once again, I cannot emphasize this enough, is not how elections are supposed to work. You're supposed to become president because you won the Electoral College. You got more votes in more states than the other person, not because sleazebag politicians have cut a deal in the back rooms. This would not, incidentally, be the last time this would happen. Again, I just said it's, they're talking about doing things like this again in 2020, but this happened in the year 2000 before y'all were born. It was Bush versus Gore. There were, again, a bunch of votes, and they kept counting. And finally they got sick of it. Like, well, let's just let the Supreme Court decide, which, again, is not at all how this is supposed to work. You can look that up on your own time. It was nuts. But anyway, so the troops will leave the South. And so the Republican governments fell quickly because Southern Democrats start to regain power, and the KKK starts to enforce that power. White Southerners, as part of their promise, part of this deal, said we will maintain African American rights. And again, we'll get into this later, but that did not in any way, shape, or form happen at all. Hayes declares that the South is now free to do what the South is going to do, which again is going to lead to what you think it's going to lead to, which is a reduction in rights for African Americans, which again is going to last for, well, depending on your opinion. Some would say until the day, some would say until the 1960s for the next civil rights movement with MLK and everything else. But we'll talk about that in later chapters. So people they realized that like, hey, growing literally only cotton really hurt us when it came to war. We didn't have any money to buy stuff. You can't fight wars with cotton balls. You can't just throw cotton at people. And so they wanted the quote that we were given in the book was out Yankee the Yankees. In other words, let's have more factories and more stuff than they do in the North. It didn't happen, of course. And they were going to try to break up these large farms into smaller farms and grow different things. The problem with that is these people that own large farms aren't really on board with that. Like, hey, you go ahead and give up your land and divide it into small farms for other people. And they're like, oh, well, I have an idea. How about no? And so anyway, that didn't really fly. And so this idea that they're going to just totally revamp and rechange the South didn't really take hold. So tomorrow, probably on your remote day, I'll post an example of these literacy tests. As we talked about over and over and over and over and over, slaves were not allowed to learn to read or write. And so this really was a targeted attack. You could write in the laws that, according to the 14th Amendment, this is not just about black people, but in reality, that's who you're targeting. Okay, poll taxes, slaves didn't make money. Literacy test, slaves are not allowed to learn to read or write. And so, who is this really going to affect? Well, some poor white people also. And so then you put the third thing in. If your grandfather could vote, and again, if your grandfather was a slave, he could not vote. And so you could see what these three things really taken together. It is an absolutely precision targeted attack on African Americans. So Plessy versus Ferguson says that segregation is legal. You can have black schools and white schools, black hospitals and white hospitals, black water fountains and bathrooms and white water fountains and bathrooms, as long as they're separate but equal. But of course, that doesn't work out either. They're not equal in any way, shape, or form. And so, things got better for a short period of time for African Americans post Civil War, but the forces of white supremacy stepped in pretty quickly to change things back. And so we've been going on for quite a long time now. So I'll leave it here. Obviously, I zoomed through a few things that deserved more detail, but it is what it is. I don't have time to go through everything in as much detail as I'd like to. But anyway, once you've got these notes written down, and I will attach them as always, you can start bringing in your notebooks. I'll check them tomorrow morning when I get here to see who's brought what in. The sooner the better. If anybody that would bring them in today, that would be great. Tomorrow would be great too, because I could grade them tomorrow. Tuesday would be great, but next Thursday and Friday, that's the end of the grade period. And I can grade a couple on those days, but the idea that I can grade every notebook on those last 2 days is not going to be really possible. So try your best to get these here ASAP. I know that some of you don't do these till afternoon, after hours, after what we would consider school hours. That's fine. So tomorrow's fine too. But try not to make it next Thursday or next Friday. Try to get them here by next Tuesday. All right. Attendance question. We'll guess the number again. I'm going to write it down, but this time it's between 101 and 200. So closest wins a shout out on the next video, which is going to be a few weeks now. So I'm going to rip this paper and put it in my drawer so I don't lose it, because I'm definitely going to throw that other piece of paper away. So those of you who've been doing your work, thank you. Keep it up. Those of you that have been doing your stuff have mostly been doing a pretty good job. And a lot of you just not doing anything. So you're probably not seeing this to begin with. But if you are, please start turning in your work. You should, under classwork, be able to see what you have and have not done. So if it says Chapter 2 test, not finished, you should think about doing that. If you have finished it, you should be able to go to Google Classroom and see your grades. But if you don't know how to do that, or you don't see it, let me know and I will tell you what's going on. Have a good day. Wear your mask. Wash your hands. Stay safe. And